Hi, I'm Morten Solvik, Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the personalities, places, and projects happening right now in the Mahler community around the world. Last month, we explored the details of a recent recreation of the world premiere of Mahler's Seventh Symphony, which was conducted by the composer in Prague in September 1908, leading a festival orchestra of Czech and German musicians. For the modern performance, Jakub Ruja led the combined forces of the Czech Philharmonic and the Bamberg Symphony Orchestra on the fairgrounds of the original site of Mahler's first performance. Jan Simon, director of the Dvorak Prague International Music Festival, spoke about hosting the event and some of the historical background, while Maestro Ruja shared his thoughts about Mahler, Czech, and German identities, and the challenge of bringing about this performance. Remember, you can see this show and all past Mahler Hours on our website and on our YouTube channel. Also, don't forget about sharing with us your Mahler moment. Whatever it was that moved you, we want to hear about it and share it. Send us your video in horizontal format, no longer than 1 minute, to social@mahlerfoundation.org. If selected, we will show your video at the end of an upcoming Mahler Hour. For this episode of the Mahler Hour, we are returning to our series of programs dedicated to Mahler's life in song. In March, we discussed the many dimensions of the composer's early songs and the Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, songs of a wayfarer, taking up everything from literary studies to manuscript studies and performance considerations. Joining me once again this time with a focus on Des Knaben Wunderhorn is my co-host, Kammersänger Thomas Hampson, as well as musicologist and editor Renate Stark-Voit. Before we get to the details, let me remind everyone attending live to post any questions you might have to the comment section. We will get to these at the end of our show. Don't forget to include your name and the country you are writing from. Also, the Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation. So if you want to support our activities, please become a member. Just go to our website at mahlerfoundation.org for all of the details. So to start off the program today on Des Knaben Wunderhorn, let me first welcome today's guests, the Germanist and musicologist Renate Stark-Voit. Welcome, Renate.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation.
And the man who needs no introduction to our audience, baritone Thomas Hampson.
The
Welcome.
infamous Kammersänger. Hey, how are you? Great to be back.
The two of you are not just cherished colleagues of mine. You bring tremendous depth and experience to especially this discussion of Des Knaben Wunderhorn. Individually and working together, you have edited, translated, published, presented, and recorded these songs on numerous projects over the years. You could almost say they're a bit of an obsession, no?
No, not really.
No, not at all. No, shall I, if I'm allowed, may I say a few words about
Sure.
the beginning, how everything began? First, I met Tom Hampson when he was on stage and I was in the audience. What a miracle for a singer and a listener. It was his role as the Knight Roland in Schubert's opera Fierabras in the 88 and the Theater an der Wien. And after that, 1 year later, we both were invited to the Mahler Festival in Kassel in Germany. And we met there. He sang Wunderhorn orchestra songs, and I gave a mediocre lecture. And after his concert, where I was so moved by his crying out and shouting out "Tralali" in the Rebelge, I just went backstage and addressed him and say, "We have to do something together." And he said, "Yes, we do have." And then you continue the story, Tom.
Well, it's a fun thing. I mean, if you think about the Kassel Mahler Festival, does it still exist?
No,
I don't know, but back in
it was only one time.
But you have to no, it was on for a couple of years because it was astounding because the guys I was working with, old friends and colleagues, were at the beginning of their conducting career. Adam Fischer was conducting a lot of the songs one season, and the next season was Manfred Honeck. And I actually asked Manfred this. I saw him when he was here at Pittsburgh. Do you remember that? And he said, yes. And I said, am I not right? Were these not some of your very, very first, breaking away from the orchestra? Because he was playing violin in the orchestra, the Vienna Philharmonic. And he said, yes, it was absolutely some of his first conducting engagements. So there's a lot of things began here, but I remember very much, Renata, that you said, if you have time, let's talk afterwards. And it was really a wonderful summer festival and a very nice environment. And there was a little beer garden out on the side, and so we sat there drinking beer and talking about Mahler. And you had just finished your dissertation; it was just published on Knaben Wunderhorn, the Mahler songs, and I was sharing with you incongruities that I found confusing in the score. And I had sung some of these with piano, but none with the orchestra, and why this and why that. And one thing led to another, and we both decided there were problems here. So I think we went back. I wasn't living in, was I living in Vienna at the time? Maybe I was. But anyway, we went and saw Hertha Blaukopf. And I think
we met her at the festival and told
that's
her.
right.
Yeah, and she put our hands together and say, "You will do that." And we
Yes,
were a bit shy because we didn't know how to. And she said, "Yeah, you have to go to Professor Füssel and ask him."
Exactly. Go to the Mahler Gesellschaft and talk to the
Mhm.
critical edition manager, Füssel, and which we did. And I mean, this is all fun and a wonderful anecdotal thing, but when I get to the essence of some of the things that really started coming out very clearly, Füssel was enormously helpful. Very enthusiastic. He rather called my bluff because I said, "Okay, I'll figure out the money to do this." And Renata and so forth. He said, "No, no, no, no. After our discussion here, we've never had actually a working musician artist be involved in the editing process or in the working process. You should work with Renato. You'll learn a lot." And it would be very interesting to have your perspective, especially this piano orchestra thing. And actually, that is perhaps one of the most significant things. And I think we should really get to the 3 or 4 things. You're all Mahler crazies here and so forth. The essential, I think a couple of essential discoveries, or if you want to call them discoveries or convictions that came up very quickly for Renata and I. And one of them was that Mahler really specifically intended piano performances and or orchestra performances and or the songs within the orchestra. But anyway, we'll get back to that.
Let me add that Füssel didn't believe us in the beginning. We had to defend this idea because up to then they had mixed the versions.
And so let me just tell our audience quickly. Here. I've got to jump in because it turns out that my two guests today were the ones putting together the critical edition, and this is what this all led to. But before we get to that, we've got to talk about what Des Knaben Wunderhorn is. Bravo. And from the literary perspective, I think we have to think a little bit about that. Renata, where do these poems come from? How did they evolve and get published?
Well, they are a product of early German Romanticism, where several people, mostly young students of philosophy and literature, met. Like the Brüder Grimm did their fairy tales and the Wörterbuch, the dictionaries, and Clemens Brentano and Achim von Arnim were 2 young students at Göttingen and Heidelberg. And when they met, they shared the idea of renewing folk poetry and collecting folk poetry because they said that they were endangered to get lost. And there were 2 very, very differing personalities. One was Brentano was the dreamer, was the poet, was the religious person, and Arnim was the businessman, the man of fact and of organizing. And they were it was really a challenge for both of them to do this together.
If I can just jump in as well, and on top of that, they were both deeply influenced from Johann Herder, Herder. And the point of that is that Herder was very much part of establishing the notion of Germanism, or what is Germany. And he started first and foremost with it, a folk must be defined by the language. And the language is found in all of the traditions, not just the writing. It wasn't like these boys decided to go out and do a hobby of collecting folk portrait. They were looking for the essential, exactly. They were looking for the essential stories, poetries, and songs and identities of the German people in the German language, handed down either in script or in oral tradition. And they collected that into this rather amazing booklet of humanity, if you will.
But there was no German state or anything at that time. That's a big political difference to nowadays.
Without question, but I would maintain that without the work of Herder and the work of these two boys and the sanctioning of Goethe, the German state would have come much later, because the German state was as much founded by the knowledge of their own language and traditions, which is what this folk poetry is about.
Exactly.
So these poems were not necessarily written by two authors. They were collected by them, and of course they were often edited, and there was a lot of creative input from them, and it was in pursuit of the notion of German identity through literature and language, and a folk tradition, defining it really in terms of the people who were from the countryside, who were not the poets of the normal ilk. And this became a very important impulse culturally to Germany and to Mahler. What was it about this that when did Mahler discover this? Because this was a book that, or depended on the edition, but it came out in several volumes that ended up in many German homes.
We have to say that all this was early Romanticism, and Mahler was born in 1860. So it was more than half a century later that he discovered these 3 volumes. And it may be that he didn't discover the 3 volumes of the original, but any later edition, like in one word or illustrated edition or whatever. We don't have noticed. We only have noticed that he once possessed the first edition, but much later than he discovered. When he was a student and a young man, you all might know that he was for himself not certain whether to become an author of literature or a musician, a composer. And he said about himself, "Bücher fresse ich, I'm devouring books." So he was really a reader from the first place, and what he did with these songs, folk songs, is not necessarily the same as reading a book of high literature. He discovered not only the book, but the style and the attitude behind it, and that's what attracted him. It was the directness, and because it was all dealing with human conditions as a whole and not with individuals.
Right.
And that's what.
He was, I think, specifically attracted to the fact that these were, as you said, from Brentano and Achim, very often not just edited. That sounds too modern, but literally extracts or the same poem will come from different sources in different years. I'd like to sort of describe the Knaben Wunderhorn and the collection process as the cream rising to the top of the milk, as it were. It's the stuff that remains in the collective consciousness of the people, of the society, if you will. And this essential snapshot in each of these poems that seemed to be a kind of, even though it was a third-person description, a first-person experience, I think Mahler felt very drawn to create that scene out of that text.
Yeah, and what he called
Mahler once said,
lyric from first hand. Yeah.
I'm going to quote Mahler on this Knaben Wunderhorn: poetry that is essentially different from any other kind of literary poetry, and could almost be called more nature and life than art.
And he said it's lyric for only this, and what he did later, Rückert, is lyric from first hand. That's a bit an enigmatic saying, because he said everything else is lyrics from second hand, whatever he meant with this. The fact is that Mahler, in contrary to all composers of his time and earlier, did not set to music any of contemporaries' high lyric poets.
Yes,
he explicitly denied. He said no. This he declared that he wouldn't do that.
If I may as well, exactly. But I think that this goes again to these poems, and it's the heart of the argument about whether Mahler was slip-handed, as he's sometimes accused by people who don't understand the parameters of this, of manipulating poetry or rewriting or changing. And within the and again to quote him, that he felt himself like a sculptor. Sculpting out chiseling out a sculpture. That's how he felt about these essential essences within the folk poetry, and he knew very well that the poems were an amalgamation very often, and so he felt, I think, very compelled and also inspired to get into the essential. And if he had to change some structure or put two poems together, which he would do, it was done, I think, in complete deference and reference to the source of where it came. He would never do that to another poet. It just wouldn't happen.
He was very much aware that what he took as the material.
Absolutely.
He respected the work of Arnim and Brentano highly, but he felt that the idea behind this was a deeper, universal idea of humanity. And he took and that's what, by the way, that's what Thomas and I felt from the beginning of our cooperation, that we are dealing with something that has a big relevance for humanity, that we can bring out the essential ideas of being with this dealing with Wunderhorn songs.
Let me get to a very important aspect of this, which is often misunderstood. And if we look at the cover to the first edition, 1806, you'll see that it's called Des Knaben Wunderhorn, Alte Deutsche Lieder. And the term lied here is often misunderstood as a song that's sung. And the terminology of lied and poetry, folk song and folk poetry, let's clarify that a little bit, because we're not really talking about a book of songs here, are we, in the sense that we understand it?
Renata?
Some of them had melodies. Some of them were sent in to them, but they were printed as texts.
Right.
It was a textbook. Yeah.
But I think Morten's point is that when contemporary, when our colleagues or when other people see something like this, or they see the word lieder, they're expecting that it means, because everybody sort of immediately says, aha, Schubert. And that's not, and then the word lieder with Gedicht, poem, rhyme, Lied, Gesänge, was auch immer, they were completely interchangeable concepts. Depending on that, it's somewhat similar to Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass metaphor. So your point is very well taken, that the Alte Deutsche Lieder, they may have been sung. They did come from singing traditions, very often, or the oral tradition, Aunt who sang it for the kids, and grandma, songs my mother taught me, all of it's all, nothing was reinvented. It's all exactly the same stuff for every generation. It's beautiful.
But Mahler's not taking these old songs. He's taking these folk poems, but also paying heed to the idea of simplicity and directness. We'll get to that with a few examples a little bit later in the show. I wanted to point out one more source, which I think is very important for Mahler in understanding the significance of this collection in particular, and it's Friedrich Nietzsche. In The Birth of Tragedy, he writes, "The folk song, however, is first and foremost a musical mirror of the world, an original melody that now seeks a parallel dream manifestation and expresses it in poetry. If you look at a collection of folk songs, for example, Des Knaben Wunderhorn, with this theory in mind, you will find countless examples of how the melody constantly gives birth to images." So what Nietzsche is doing is he's saying that a sort of truth in a deeply sort of musical, artistic way lies in a collection of folk poetry, which I think is something we mustn't overlook when it comes to Mahler as a young intellectual at the university, looking at and being one of a really early reader of Nietzsche as well. So here we have another impulse where Mahler is looking at this poetry from an aesthetic perspective that really tries to come to the essence of life as it's lived.
That's beautiful, Morten. What I'd love to just throw in on top of that is, again, that everybody realizes that you're listening to and listening. We're talking about a collection of various sources of the same poem, of the same story, of the same context. It's not like, I often laughingly say, folk poetry is not some Urmensch under an Ur tree in an Ur cave writing Ur text. It's literally the stuff that goes from generation to generation in a specific language, telling the same story in different parameters. And sometimes it went with melodies, and sometimes it didn't. And we have all sorts of examples that we could jump right to the 20th century and Aaron Copland and all of those folk songs where he got them, and but also the end of the 18th century, 19th century was the first blossoming of several cultures, in England especially, collecting folk poetry, trying to figure out what is it that's coming direct from the source. What are people expressing in their life day in and day out?
Right. And this tradition over hundreds of years, as you say, sort of boiling it down to the essence. And so the simplicity and the repetition of it, making it ever more relevant to the core experience of life, taking away all of the fanciness of lyrical poetry that we were just referring to. Let's look at the poems a little and the songs a little bit more in detail. Otherwise, we're going to get time will get away from us here. We know that there are from sketches that have survived that Mahler began composing songs already as a teenager and certainly as a student, completing assignments at the conservatory. But the record is very incomplete. So when did he start publishing these works, and what role did the Wunderhorn songs play in the early stages?
Mahler already quoted or was talking in the Wunderhorn tone when he composed his Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen.
Right.
And so we don't know whether he had this wordings or verses from real reading, or whether he was so much in the style already of this world that he did poems by himself that sounded like from the Wunderhorn.
Well, look at it just quickly. If we go to the actual origin of the Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, he had 6 poems, and 2 of them, the two that he did not set, are actually pieces and parts and pieces of Des Knaben Wunderhorn existing poetry. So he had to have known the volumes or our volume in some way. It's hard to imagine in his voracious reading and his interest in philology and so forth, especially his devotion to Goethe, that he would not have, as a student, been somehow aware of this collection of poetry. But the Fahrende Gesellen, actually quotes quite specifically parts of Des Knaben Wunderhorn, which is, I think, very important.
Yeah, you mentioned Goethe. Don't forget that the Wunderhorn was devoted to Goethe.
It was
dedicated. Sorry,
Well, Goethe said if a family is going to have 2 books, it should be the Holy Bible and Des Knaben Wunderhorn, and as oben unten, as unten oben,
Yeah. Well, so Mahler was certainly aware of this by the mid 1880s. We don't want to get too detailed in terms of his biography, but long before these things are published, I think is the point that we're making here. He starts to really publish at a more serious rate in around the 1890s, really, or it's quite late, really, in his own compositional career in terms of his songs. He certainly had written much by then. But when we get into the Liedergesänge, sorry?
It's still the first thing that he was able to publish with the publisher Strecker from Schott. Yeah. And after that, he tried to publish everything else. He offered him the First Symphony. He offered him the Wunderhorn orchestra songs, and he like bombed him down. And the publisher said, "No, I'm sorry. That's too much."
But Morten, you and I have talked about this. Let's not forget that the convolute of which Schott published, or Weinberger published, the Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, is seamlessly interwoven with the first of the Des Knaben Wunderhorn poems as well. And they got separated in publication, but actually the convolute that's sitting in Western Ontario is bound together. So there's I think the chronology, like you said it before, we can only reference it. And it's actually a thing that you and I've talked about before. We really want to dig down, and Roman's done a fantastic job. But I think there's another level of the genealogy of his compositional process and these early songs that could be quite interesting. But I do agree with you. And why don't you pull up this wonderful Des Knaben Wunderhorn by topics, and it's got some years onto it. And so
let's do the chronology first.
And if I can anecdotally say, this is one of the things that completely blew me away when I first met Renate. This completely, she handed me her, oh, you might want to read this. I don't know,
Yeah.
in her
I just wanted
self-deprecating way. Yeah, but I read this book, and in this book comes the definition of these different kinds of songs and where they come from. I had never broken it down like that, and I couldn't put this book down. I was working in Prague at the time. I was flying around. I had this book in my hand for 2 weeks until I devoured it. And I called her up. I said, we have to do this.
So we're going to get to the categories in a moment. I just wanted to get our audience a little bit of sense of the order of them. We have a whole page that says before November 1889. Can you explain that, Renate? How do we know this? And can we do any better?
Oh, I forgot to ask you why do we know this exact month? I forgot to ask you why this is
before
dated.
November,
but,
before November 89.
Yeah, because but then don't let's lose time with that.
No. All right. Anyway, there's much that happened before then, and we really don't know much about the order. And
maybe because of Leipzig, because some of them are connected with Marion and
Marion
yes.
Weber, yes.
Yeah. Yes. But I don't give much on this dating.
Okay. Well, let's go to the next slide, and we're just going to walk through the years, because now we can start, when we start being able to date, we can see what he's doing, really. He's only writing a handful most summers and most years, right? So this is 1892. Then the next year, we get another batch, 1893. This is an important year. We're going to talk about this in some detail.
Whereas Urlicht might stem from 92. But
then look at 96, 98, and then 99 and 1901. So as we get further into the 90s, he's writing fewer and fewer of these songs, and we really only get the Revelge and Tabaksel, which we're going to get to next time. We're not going to have enough time to cover all of the late Wunderhorn songs. We're going to jump in there at some of the earlier ones, and now we're going to look at the categories that Renate has created for us. I took away the German titles to make it a little bit easier to read. If we take these 24 songs and we divide them into categories, we can do so by thinking first about children's songs, dance songs, satirical songs. We'll talk a lot more in detail about what that means, because children's songs often have ironic, satirical. They operate with metaphor.
Yeah, let us point out what a child meant in the early 19th century. It was one of the most endangered beings,
species.
A child, because species, because more than half of the born children didn't reach even childhood or
puberty,
adulthood.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think your point, Morten, is very right. The children's songs, practically all of them are children's circumstances seen through very wizened adult eyes, even in the poetry. And it's an observation of children.
I think it also feeds into the notion of simplicity being far more complete, far more complex and layered. And this is in the folk style, remember? So he's playing both of these in very interesting ways. Let's go to the next.
But what I mean is that they're not children's songs that you would teach children to sing.
No. We'll get to that in a second. And then we have, of course, the topic of nature. Lots of nature. Mahler said, "I want to be remembered as a singer of nature." But this too is a nature that occupies a very special world. And we'll get to a very, very famous example of this as well, the second half of the show, Des Antonius von Padua Fischpredigt. And then we have another category, This World and Beyond, where it becomes spiritual. And this too we'll get to in our next show, especially as you'll notice, all three of them were incorporated as vocal works into symphonies, which is a very interesting characteristic of these three, This World and Beyond, and how they become a very important instrument, literally, for the metaphors that Mahler wants to transport in his symphonies, in the second, third, and fourth symphonies. There you have them all three of them there. All right, and then we get the last category, Love and War, which often intersect actually in some of these. We know that the lover and the soldier are the same, and it's a tragic tale. Some of them are far more comical than that. But soldier songs are a very important theme in Mahler. Renate.
May I repeat what I tried to say in the beginning, that Mahler's subjects are not individuals, and especially here in these love and war songs, it's always kind of what we would call the loser, the one who is sent to gallows, or
That's
who
right.
is who is a prisoner. It's the
Outsider.
poor people, the outsider. That's what Mahler's interest goes.
Yes.
He defends his socialist humanity. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, I think this outsider carries with it the idea of victimhood, but more
Yes.
importantly, the overwhelming arc of unavoidable fate.
And also the
And
accusation of regimes.
yes, exactly. Within a context of regime or Gesellschaft, society, norms of which this young person is a victim or unable to live within. It's
Er ist
always
ein
standing from the
König.
side.
Er ist ein König, er ist weit davon. He is far away. He might be the king, but he's far away from the battlefield.
Right.
He leaves us alone here.
Right.
That's
So
the essence.
yeah, so it's important to point out these are not war songs of the victor. They are definitely of the victim. And that is, of course, not one, it's not a patriotic perspective, but really a deeply humanistic one that
They're all
really
in minor,
the ugly
in
side.
D minor. All four of them are in D minor.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
says something.
That is also the key of usually of death and tragedy. Yeah.
Oh, you
All
mean
right.
like Don Giovanni?
Yeah, a bit like that. Just as a reminder, if you're with us live, feel free to send us questions to the chat. We'll be happy to answer in a Q&A at the end of the hour. We're going to try to leave aside some time at the end. And if we get to the top of the hour, hang on, because we will get to your questions for sure. All right, let's take a closer look, as we promised, at some of the songs. We want to go back to one of the so-called children's songs. What's interesting about the poetry is its directness, its simplicity. Of course, the musical language may strike you at first as being simple, but the execution is not. You want to take us through that, Thomas, a little bit about, we talk about Wer hat dies Liedlein erdacht, which on the surface of it is this wonderful, airy, bright piece. What's it like singing this? And is it as simple as it sounds?
No. But few things are. It should sound self-understood, and I don't know if simple, but it certainly should sound not labored. The melismas serve a particular function of like a folk melody, yada da da dee da 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 dee da 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 da. The fun thing about the lead line, and I'm sure Renate, another thing that Renate opened my eyes to in the Germanist world is what we see in the German, the Bildersprache, heavily symbolized images that are used, and really the poetry becomes sort of a laboratory of human nature, and heavily metaphorically referenced in plants and colors and animals and so forth. And the Wer hat das Liedlein erdacht is quite wonderful in that the young girl, this red brown haired girl, by the way, it's the brunettes that are the sexy ones in the Knaben Wunderhorn. It's not the blondes. The blondes are somehow more pure. It's the brunettes that'll get you in a lot of trouble. And a brunette with really rosy lips, you're dead meat, guys. It's over. You're done. And so this, Ronald, if you want to jump in on some of the other imagery in this poem, but the thing is, it's again that I find in all of these so-called children's songs, and I think we should call them children's songs or songs about children. It's not just about children. It's about, and I've always said this. Mahler seems to me like the wizened, wise uncle observing his young charges, playing on the field or up on the Alm or having a picnic, and the boy's way behind the girl, and the girl knows that the picnic alone can bring a lot of, schmoozy poozy and a lot of good funs, and the guy's just, I'm here to eat a sandwich. Leave me alone. And it's just, and also this instinct, the male instinct of going off and grabbing the pitchfork or the shovel and go beat the enemy and whatever else. And the girlfriend says, yes, but what about me? And he says, oh no, sweetheart, I'll be back. It's no problem. I'll be back. And of course he comes back too late, and if he comes back at all. And so there's always this kind of overlapping narrative of sort of the natural instincts that we all can observe in kids. And I think that's where, you know, of course, the schlimme Kinder artig zu machen is great fun. Like you said, it's like, why isn't the husband home? You know,
Yeah, but
what's the guy on the horse really all about? Is this about the kids? No, I mean, she says, no, the kids, you know, they're on my nerves. They won't leave me alone. And I say, they're always there. Oh God, yes. Okay, bye-bye.
Thomas, let us focus on this Lidl
Yeah.
or lead line,
Yeah,
which
lead
is
line or
one of these songs. It runs into a dead end. It ends with a nonsense verse. It ends with es haben's 3 Gänse übers Wasser gebracht. So that's there's nothing. At the end, let us listen to it.
Yeah. So the title means who wrote this little song. So the song it's a song about the song, and it's as absurd as the title might suggest, because it doesn't really answer the question.
But I think it's a song that is always there.
That's another
oben am Berg, dort oben am Berg, meine Liebe ist da, der Papi ist da, der kommt da, la 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 la. Da taucht sie doch auch, you know. So
all right,
here we
let's
go.
have a listen.
Do we have we wanted the orchestra version, didn't we?
Well, we could do the orchestra or the piano. Which do you prefer?
No,
let's do. I think Jeffrey's quite. Well, let's listen a little bit. Let's start the piano and then maybe go to the orchestra. Whatever you want. God bless Jeffrey Parsons.
Dort oben am Berg, in dem hohen Haus, in dem Haus, da gucket ein feins liebs Mädel heraus. Es ist nicht dort daheim, es ist nicht dort daheim, es wird sein Töchterlein, es wohnet auf grüner Heide.
So
Okay,
let's go.
thank you.
If you want to go to, can I just quickly, I know we didn't plan on this, but if you all look at, if everybody's looking at the record jacket, this is really a lot of metaphor here. Jeffrey and I are standing in front of Mahler's piano. The Mahler piano, the piano that he had that they got in Italy, and this is in the Cobb Family Foundation collection of pianos, which they also have Purcell's piano and they have Fauré's piano and so forth. This was the quadruple string Graf that Mahler had in his house. Behind you is the cover of the first edition of Des Knaben Wunderhorn songs, and the books stacked up behind Jeffrey are a tale in and of themselves that we don't have time to tell, but I tell you, they are the 3 volumes that Annabel Mildenburg loaned to Mahler to work out of. And when he died, Annabel Mildenburg wrote to Alma and said, "I have the books back, they belong to my grandparents." And she said, "Of course." And all of this is written inside of the books. The reason I know this so intimately is because they're in my library, which is one of I will probably be buried with them, but never mind. Anyway, it was just a really fun photograph. And this is a year before Jeffrey died, which was very sad.
I will never forget the Christmas when you told me about this.
Yeah, I tell you, that was Andrea. She you know, and the collectors in Vienna. It's a story unto itself. I've written about it. I should probably, you know, anyway, just let everybody know they're in good hands.
Great. So let's listen to the orchestral version. Do we want to say anything before we get to the orchestral version of this? Because
why do you prefer it, Renate? Why do you want to hear it?
Well, because we should go to Fischpredigt for the piano version. That's what we decided yesterday, and I would like to hear the end of this song from.
Yeah, can you come in about a minute and a half into the song and on the orchestra?
I don't know if we can. If Marco Ayala is able to do that, that would be wonderful. If not, try to fast forward.
There's no iconography in this cover.
Yeah.
Remarkable same tempo.
Dort oben am Berg, in dem hohen Haus, in dem Haus. Da gucket ein feins, liebs Mädel heraus. Es ist nicht dort daheim, es ist nicht dort daheim. Es ist, es wird sein Töchterlein. Es wohne da grüner mein Herz ist wund, komm Schätzle, mag's gesund, dein schwarzbraune Äuglein, die haben mich verwundt, dein rusiger Mund macht Herzen gesund, macht Jugend verständig, macht Tote lebendig, macht Kranke gesund, macht Kranke gesund, ja gesund. Wir hatten da schöne Lieder erdacht, es haben's 3 Gänse übers Wasser gebracht. Zwei graue und eine weiße, zwei graue und eine weiße, und wer das Lied nicht singen kann, dem wollen sie es pfeifen, ja.
By the way, I have to tell you, I searched for it a couple of times. I think the last time we did a show, I remember literally 10 or 15 years ago, a very informed fan wrote me a pretty long letter talking about what these 3 Gens übers Wasser were all about. There is if somebody knows this or wants to have fun looking it up, that it is worth the trouble of the research. There is a story within a story here. This Drei Gens übers Wasser gebracht has a particular metaphorical meaning, which we probably can summarize, but it was really quite interesting. And I thought I had put it in my computer. It is certainly in some folder in boxes yet to be unpacked in Vienna, but never mind.
The 3 geese that bring the song.
The 3 geese, yeah.
Okay, we are going to be very short on time because we now need to get to our next song. We really don't have a lot of time for commentary on this one, but the next one I could do a whole show on, and I just might because I'm so tempted about the topic. Let's talk about this song first. What is Antonius von Padua Fischpredigt about, Renate?
Well, first of all, it comes from a religious preach or a Predigt.
Sermon.
Sermon by Abraham a Santa Clara, a Baroque German priest who died in Vienna, and who was a very ironic and satirical priest. He was literary, very in his style. He was very elaborated and very ironical and cynical, and he chose for this
sermon.
poem, for this sermon, he chose a topic of I don't know how to say the parable.
Parable.
Where animals, in this case fish, represent human
nature.
Human nature, and the fact that nobody is learning anything from any sermon. So the sermon always goes.
Quite.
It's like a very negative, or let's say pessimistic.
Sarcastic. It's very sarcastic.
But it's a point of view that is for a religious man is not very hopeful.
So St. Anthony goes to the church to preach. No one is there, so he goes down to the river and preaches, and the fish swim up, and they're so fascinated by all of this, but they swim away just as dumb as they were before, which is yet another layer of commentary.
And
they swim away as ambivalent as they were before.
Ambivalent, okay, I shouldn't say.
And that's the content. And the story for Mahler is a very dense and very thrilling story, because he began to write this. It all happened in the summer of 93 in Steinbach. He began
Let's have a look
write
at the manuscript, because we have the manuscript to the piano version.
Yeah, he tried on 8th of July, one day after his birthday. He wrote down the piano version, and later gave it to his friend. And this piano version is titled Mit behaglichstem Humor, and the tempo is an 8-note 152. Remind this, and it has nearly 200 bars.
Renate, excuse me, Renate, I'm going to interrupt you because we have to look at the top of the manuscript just for a second. Can we?
Yeah.
And here it says
Arnold, and this is written much later, but because he now calls it the Vorstudie zu meiner zweiten Symphonie.
Right, Scherzo zum zweiten. Zur zweiten Symphonie.
I can't read it. I have my picture on it. Yeah, but this is an afterthought. When he wrote the piano song, he had not from the first moment the idea of incorporating it into the symphony.
But we need to translate it into English. Not everyone understands what is being stated.
This is a preliminary study for the scherzo of the Second Symphony.
That's right.
But that's not what it was. It was an independent piano song.
But it turned into the scherzo the same summer, didn't it?
Yeah, and then let me continue. And on the 30th of July, on the end of July, he wrote literally the scherzo for the Second Symphony, where he was working on the whole time, and it grew up to the 3 times as long amount. 581 bars, and it is called In ruhig fließender Bewegung, and it's something completely different. And the next day, 1st of August, one day after the next day, he wrote the orchestra version of the song with the 197 bars, called Behäbig mit Humor, and with the 8th note at 138, so a little slower than the piano version. Isn't that astonishing?
Let's listen to that, because we have all 3 recordings lined up, and we're going to hear from Thomas why the tempo has to be slowed down, why the 8th note has to have a longer value. Let's just listen to the beginning of the piano version. 8th of July, 1893.
Zur Predigt, die Kirche fährt ledig, geht zu den Flüssen und predigt den Fischen. Sie schlagen mit den Schwänzen, im Sonnenschein glänzen, im Sonnenschein glänzen, sie glänzen, sie glänzen, glänzen. Die Karpfen mit
Okay. Let's now go to the scherzo of the symphony and listen to how it's rendered, both in terms of tempo and, of course, color, instrumental color. Okay. It's just a fascinating study in sound color, the way he changes. There's almost nothing repeated. If the clarinets take it the next time, then it's in the oboe after that. And then, of course, it comes in the piccolo. And then when it's repeated in the high clarinet, it goes to the E flat just to make it a different texture. It's a really incredible transformation of this. And as you say, Renate, this expands into something far more ambitious symphonically. Now we're going to listen to the orchestral version, so that was 3 weeks later. After that, a few days later, he creates this version of it.
Antonius zur Predigt, die Kirche wird ledig, geht zu den Flüssen und predigt den Fischen. Sie schlagen mit den Schwänzen, im Sonnenschein glänzen, im Sonnenschein glänzen, sie glänzen, sie glänzen, glänzen. Die Karpfen mit Rogen sind all hierher gezogen, haben Mäule aufrissen, sich zu Hört befließen. Kein Predigt nie malen.
Then listen to this.
Den Fischen so gefallen. Spitzgoschelte Hechte, die immer so fechten, sind eilends verschwommen zu hören den Frommen. Auf jede Phantasten, die immer so fasten, die Stockfisch, ich meine, zur Predigt erscheinen. Kein Predigt niemals, den Stockfisch so gefallen.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's talk a little bit about tempo.
Well, look, for one thing, I take him very serious his word, and I had forgotten that the piano version was actually quicker. It's text, but it's also the sarcasm. Renata, I haven't looked inside the partitur of the Second Symphony for quite some time, but in this song, over each one of the outbreaks, and that's why I wanted to hear at least one of them. That was the late great Ernst Ottensammer on clarinet. The first one he writes with mit Humor, and the first outbreak he writes mit Humor over the clarinet part, and then in the second one he writes mit Parodie. And I looked at Ernst and I said, I have Otti, and I said, it's up to you. All I know is we'll accompany you. Go on your flight of fancy. Maybe it's just enough to think you're being humorous, but then you have to be paroditic, or something. And what is the difference? And I think he said, well, what do you think the difference is? I said, that is completely up to you. But there was a difference to Mahler. And this is hugely important. And it's one of those things you just, as a performer, as an artist, you throw yourself into it, you try it, maybe on Thursday it feels this way, or last year or something, you're always trying to I am always trying to, what did he mean by that?
Can I offer
please.
my 2 cents? I think with humor means something was funny. With parody, there's a deeper undertone. There's a sarcasm.
I agree, without question. Yeah, there's a bite to it, and I think you can hear that's what we landed. You're absolutely right. But
Yeah.
the fact that telling a clarinet in one song in 3 different solo parts, to have that difference of intent.
Right.
Is something that that's why I like to work with young orchestras, and I very often do these songs without a conductor so that I can talk about them and tell them where they're from, and we talk about. And I inevitably have to leave quite a bit of time for this song because you have to bring that to the table as a player. I think the orchestration is genius in that it's like a study in fishes. Uh, it's incredibly
Colors.
observant, and also this sort of all of the references to the preacher have this kind of rabbinical modal tonality to it, and it feels kind of like, yeah, well, I did what I could, I said what I could, I don't know, if they go home, if they change, if they think about it, okay, good. If they don't, what am I? I'm just the preacher, I'm the messenger, it's up to God. There's something incredibly human and prophetic about this song, and I think that's what just possessed him, and the fantasy in the orchestra is just one of the most exciting things he read. And of course you could call it all sorts of fishes, but I think it's far more fundamental than that. It's quite genius.
Yeah,
that might be the reason why this one text is not a folk song. It is an author. There is an author, and Mahler chooses as well because he so much loved the text. He said he was bursting out with laughter while composing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he saw all these, and show them again the Böcklin picture, because there is saying and reports and documents that he had it in his room when he composed that, which I don't believe, because he composed it in Steinbach. But
he may have had it in his study back home in Vienna.
In Hamburg.
Yeah. Oh, that's right, in Hamburg, 1893. Yeah, of course. So that he may have actually owned this painting. Yeah. And what's interesting about the painting is on the back side of the painting is a portion of this very same poem, which is, I think, very significant. And it's also, by the way,
this might be painting, the inspiration.
I believe this painting is also from 1893 or 1892, maybe the year before. It's almost exactly the same time as Mahler's song.
He certainly didn't possess the original. He had a reproduction. No,
but yes. Yeah, but the painting itself, what I'm saying is the painting was inspired by the same poet, by the same poem. We are running out of time, but we will get to your questions. I just want to give everyone a quick forward view of what we're doing next time. We clearly couldn't do all the Wunderhorn songs this time around, and we'll have another show dedicated to Des Knaben Wunderhorn. My two guests will join me again, and we will be talking about the military songs. We'll try to finish up more of the integration into the symphonies of the actual vocal movements. We'll be talking about Ballade, Humoresken. What else are we going to be talking about?
Well, I think you've summed that up. I would love to leave, because I think all of you are so passionately interested in Mahler, but also Mahler's songs and the symphonies and so forth. One of the things, if I may, Renate, and join in here, but it was very quick for us in our first, jumping into the deep end of this research and just establishing, the first thing we want to establish, who wrote, when did he write what, in what version? And then you come up with these extraordinary stories, like you've just told, like the Antonius, that had this genealogy that skipped the song, came back to the song. And then you have Es sungen drei Engel, which became only an orchestral movement. And then he liked it so much, he went back and made the piano version. Then you have the piano in 1892 turning into orchestra songs being turned down by Schott, and 6 years later we have Das Himmlische Leben coming up. So what that immediately told us was there was something more going on in writing these songs than just piano, studies to go into orchestra pieces. So we started quite quickly saying, okay, we have 3 different genres here that we have to work with. The other thing that we came up with, I think, very quickly was from text source and from ballad. It was very popular because of the Zell recording and the Titanic iconic presence of Schwarzkopf and Fischer-Dieskau, that somehow these folk poetries would be better served by duets, boys and girls singing in the same song. And
we'll get to that.
No, but I mean, I'm just saying these are essential elements. The other thing was the most important thing was taking the piano manuscripts seriously and saying these are piano songs. They may have had other genealogies, they may have had other tempos, they may have had other uses down the road, but these are piano songs that turned into other things. And this was, I think, one of the most significant things, most significant, and it had a ripple effect, because by the time we got to the Universal Publishing, we said, look, there's no point in publishing our work if you're not going to take the other stuff off the market, because the other songs in the books, if you read them, were completely contradictory because people had taken the same sources and dumped it onto a piece of paper. So, it's been a very serious process. All of this work was dedicated to Leonard Bernstein from my heart, and also from Renate's, but having worked with him, he was gone by the time it was just finished. Obviously, he died in 90, but I think we did, the other things are things about Mahler's personality. Mahler had a tremendous sense of humor, a fantastic, and he liked to laugh, and he liked to be, believe it or not, happy, so, anyway, I think there were some elemental things that came up, and yes, we'll get into some of this in more detail in the next, when we really unpack ballad tradition. Never mind. Renate, jump in.
That's what I wanted to point out, that we began in encountering a lot of misunderstandings about these songs. The first misunderstanding came from my from my Germanistic colleagues, who on one hand said this is garbage texts, but Mahler uses them, abuses them. So how can you abuse something that is worth nothing? And that was my first problem, that I had to deal with this famous Hans Meyer at my time in my field, and point out that we had so many misunderstandings. You already listed them with the duet singing. Mahler's songs are not his operas. Mahler was an opera conductor, and he wrote songs, and he said orchestrating of a song is not translating, it is rewriting a poem.
Exactly.
A recreation, and that's the point.
Okay.
And so we fought a long and sometimes painful fight.
Imagine the fight that Mahler had to fight if you were having trouble. But I want to just end with one more thought, and then we will really have to go to the questions. There are only a couple here, and that is that this is not a cycle. This is a collection of songs.
Oh, thank you. God bless. He only wrote one cycle. The only cycle he wrote, called a cycle, and he called it a cycle, was Kindertotenlieder. And he said, these songs in this order, no. He very often performed one or the other, especially 2 and 4, outside of the context. He said in Kindertotenlieder, these songs in this order, in this key relationship, and never single.
But don't believe him everything that he said, because he once offered the 3rd symphony to Schott and to be performed as single symphonic movements.
And they were.
I have the letter.
They were.
I have the letter.
Well, that's another conversation. But in terms of his songs, there's only one cycle. And that's
okay, folks. We have to break off. We're way past our hour, but I did promise the questions, so let's have a go at them. Sixtus Beckmesser writes, can the guests go over some, if any, of the modifications of the original Wunderhorn texts that Mahler made in his settings?
Wow, that's a wonderful question, and it'd be a wonderful thing to do, and it needs some preparation. And may I just offer that as part of the next series? When we go there, I'll unpack that very question for you, and with Renate as well. It's a very good question. Some songs are 2 different poems put together. Some songs got variations, or he took this out. It's a very valid point.
Perhaps the most significant is Wo die schönen Trompeten blasen.
Yeah, without question. That's
2 Wunderhorn songs.
Trunks of 2 Wunderhorn songs made into a song, but a very beautiful question and very valid.
So we'll get to that next time. Next question: how do the Lieder compare with the spirit of Bohemian Czech folk melodies and their sense of developing a national identity within the Austrian-Hungarian Empire?
Exactly with the Fischpredigt, Mahler said, here you hear the sound of my Bohemian Heimat. But this is a very philosophical, very, very delicate subject to make.
Exactly, and just parenthetically, this is
elements of temple, of synagogue song in das himmlische Leben, which are parodistic and mixed up with church personalities, with saints like Cecilia, and this is very delicate. This subject.
We
I
talked
think
about
a
this
valid
last
point.
week.
So a valid point of this is the Habsburg Empire was not by any means a haven of happiness. There was always a seething underbelly of identity of the dominated cultures within this. And the Czech were split between Burma and Moravian. And exactly the same time as the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s, Dvorak is writing his beautiful Zigeuner melody in Opus 55 on Hayduk poetry. And he sets them to German. And he gets hugely criticized, and he goes back to his friend Hayduk and puts them back into Czech, and then Czech gets reinvited. It's quite a mess. But this seething identity issue found exactly on what we were saying, the poetry or the language of the people. How can you call me Austrian when in fact I'm Burmish or I'm Moravian or I'm, something else? What is the political context versus the cultural context? And I think that's a very huge identifying point.
Yeah, we talked about that in the last show when we discussed the premiere of the Seventh Symphony, where Mahler combined the German and Bohemian, the Czech musicians on stage for the performance. And that wasn't without a few, with some trepidation. He writes to Bruno Walter, let's hope that we can pull this off if they don't end up bickering with each other. So Mahler was clearly aware of it, but he, of course, then embodied that both those worlds in a way that made it, I think, a very forceful way to present it. Okay, this goes on to the next question.
So many contradictory sayings by him. He said, I'm not a Bohemian, I'm a German. And then at another occasion, he said the opposite. So
depends on what day you asked him, probably. There's a similar question about German identity, but we've kind of covered that in Trading Muse Off. I wish we could have a definitive version. We can't. And Evelyn Nichols asked, could it be possible that the first hand, and here she was responding to a moment when we were talking about the immediacy of the text, could it be possible that first hand means the first direct emotion that mankind is feeling when coping with the problems that surround him? So the sort of the ur emotion, the fundamental emotion. I don't know if that's a question or if that's simply
well, I think, Evelyn, I think you're onto something. I think that distinction is valid and not valid, but it's important to make that when we talk about the first hand, we can't just get stuck in the idea of first person poetry form, that you're actually that the immediacy of the directness of the event is what's being conveyed. And I think what inspired him at that moment.
Well, we're going to call it. We're going to call it a day. I want to thank both my guests for a wonderful hour that I knew would just fly by. We're going to give you more of this when we get to the second half of our series on Des Knaben Wunderhorn.
You remind me of one of those very athletic umpires on the foosball mat, running back and forth between the teams, trying to keep the ball in play. So well done, Morten.
Doing my best. Went over by 9 minutes. The Mahler Hour, brought to you by Mahler Foundation and contributors around the world, is a monthly streaming event bringing together individuals interested in the composer, the thinker, the humanist, Gustav Mahler, as we explore not only his life and works, but also how his legacy still informs the essential aspects of human experience and how we can turn that experience into a force for the good in today's world. Become a member and support our activities. I want to thank my co-host and guest today, Thomas Hampson and Renate Stark-Voit, for joining us, as well as our production team, Marco Ayala and Monica Ngiano, for our executive director for administration. The Mahler Hour is back in November. Stay tuned for an upcoming announcement regarding time and topic. I hope you can join us. That's our program for today. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.
Bye.